so many people today. They think the government and the nation is the same. They're separate. In so many places, we see governments that hold different politics than the people. There's two problems that we have generally. One is that the people don't know what the government is doing. And then there's a second problem that people do know what the government is doing, but they either don't care, they don't think it's serious, or they do care and they don't think they can do anything about it. They don't think they have the power to change it. What's right is what's right for them. What's wrong is what's wrong for them. All the elite figures say, ordinary people don't care. But when I go and speak at universities, when I speak to normal people, when I have a talk in private, everybody cares. The problem is they don't feel like they can change it. They feel like they don't have the power to change it because the government decides these things for them. The legislatures, even after elections, decide things for them. And our elections are increasingly becoming not a choice of who you're for out of all these people, but who you're against. And people vote against keeping the bad guy out of office instead of putting a good guy in office. They've got two ways of trying to keep people silent. One is fear, that there will be some consequence, there will be some punishment. And the other one is inducement, where they try to reward you, they try to, make you more successful. They try to buy you out, basically. This influence machine goes into action. They put a couple White House officials on the media that explain, why this is great and why everything's okay now, why it was never really a problem before. But anyway, just because we're so wonderful, we've changed the laws to make your life better. And a lot of people in media, they repeat this. They write the quote. They say such and such said this.
Only on Be Positive.
And it gets put out through political sort of partisan channels and reporting. It goes through the more like press wire service reporting, where they try not to take a position and they just say such and such said this, such and such said that. And then people begin to take these statements that were reported as facts that were reported. And then it goes into, the Facebook, Twitter stream where everybody's in open combat all the time and they're just repeating things and distorting things to make it more of sort of a reality. And then we get to this world that we have today, we see so clearly now that wasn't so clear then, where people are pushing positions using quotes and reporting and misreporting to try to create facts or create a reality that's not true, but it is popular. And we look at things like Facebook that decide, what to show you next in this feed that agrees with what you already think and, reinforce these structures and realities. And eventually what we have is this influence machine. But again, we run into this system where a lot of people care about it, but they don't feel that anything can be done about it. These influence machines, it's about every issue. It's about the election in the United States. It's about China. It's about America. It's about Russia. It's about Germany. It's about immigration. It's about anything that you think about. It's about technology and tech companies that are constantly happening, even when we're asleep, because half the time it's run by machines, to help you be certain of a world that's not really being proven or established. It's merely being talked about. It's very popular to tell a story that everyone is so free, everything is so free. But the reality is we have a great freedom of expression in a very small space. You could do anything you want between this line and this line. But if you go beyond that, if you talk about something outside of that, if you say something that's a little bit unusual, now all of the constraints appear. Those could be, again, state constraints, the law and its punishments. Those could be popular constraints from the community and its opinion, which nowadays, we've all seen the sort of mob crowd effects come over on the internet, where disfavored opinions, even well-thought, well-grounded, well-argued opinions that contradict what is popular become attacked. I think even journalists are very well aware of this. This is sort of sweeping the media landscape today. And then this comes down to this bottom issue that I think when you talk about freedom, you get back to. What does freedom mean when people are so comfortable that they don't want to do anything exceptional, that they don't want to do anything unusual, that they don't want to do anything unpopular? The only thing they want to do is what everyone else is doing because it's great. they're in their nice couch, even in a cheap apartment, even if they're not doing well economically, there's so much entertainment that they can get by. They can ignore their problems, their family's problems, the world's problems, and other people who are paid to think about these problems, corporations and governments. They take advantage of this vacuum where everybody else is kind of relaxing through the times. Sometimes because they're lazy, but I think more charitably because they deal with problems and these unequal times where they have very little and these powerful people have so much that they need
only on Be Positive.
They need a way psychologically to make it to the next day and show up at their work, which could be very difficult. It could be very unrewarding in order to keep on surviving. I think if you can agree with the things that you do today, the funny thing is you don't have to worry about tomorrow because it doesn't matter if tomorrow comes. You want to see tomorrow come. Who doesn't? I think is our last choice in terms of how do we survive the moment and keep going and keep moving forward, because process corruption and the fight against corruption, I think, it begins as an internal battle. But each of us in our lives, each of us in our work, we're all parts of different systems. Whether we're talking agencies, institutions, news organizations, or communities and societies, if we all engage in the same thinking, it's not for me to decide what's right and wrong. We're letting other people make those decisions for us. And unfortunately, in our highly complex and highly organized society, it's a very small group who get to decide what's right and wrong for all of us. They think the law is always on their side, right? Well, what's right is what's right for them. What's wrong is what's wrong for them. And we need to democratize that. We need to be wider about that. There's this distance between suspicion. We all think the government is doing something, or we all think some bad thing is happening. Fact of something is happening. The evidence, the documents, the recording, the proof, the science. And then convincing the world, not forcing the world, but persuading the world, convincing the world that it is correct. And I think this actually is a noble task. The question is just, we have so many power structures that are trying to hijack this process. We have, that paint barrel of state propaganda that's trying to take this broadcast power, this mass communication, and force it to convince people of things, or persuade it to convince people of things that are not true because it's right for them. But ultimately, every one of those writers, every one of those photographers, every one of those, authors, thinkers, even every one of those people who's just on the couch at home watching TV, they all have to have something that they're thinking. They're all individuals. They all have a voice. People can change things. Maybe they can't fight the whole system. Maybe they can't bring it down, as you said, particularly not alone, because as individuals, we're weak, we're exposed, we're vulnerable. But one person with a camera, one person with a pencil, they can convince other people. And that's how every revolution begins. That's why every authoritarian system is afraid of the students. The students are poor. They don't have anything. They have nothing but passion and connection, because there's many of them around. Until people become uncomfortable, it will be really difficult to get them to change in a meaningful way.
Only on Be Positive.
This sort of gets us back to the topic of elections and the way things are today. And so many people in media and elsewhere are going, oh, hooray, hooray, everything's better. Life is fixed. As long as these systems are designed by humans, they'll be directed by humans. And the one bright, beautiful thing about the political connection to technology is that the political people who direct a technology in the way it's used, they can't build it. They don't understand it. They're not technologists, they're politicians. And so they have to use other people. They have to, order engineers, build this, do this, whatever. And many of those people are young. And when I talk to different audiences around the world, the one thing that I see is that the younger a person is, the more willing they are to depart from the system as it exists, the more willing they are to try something new. They are not to engage in the kind of reflexive analysis that a lot of us do, where they go, oh, that's crazy, or that's wrong, or that's dumb, but just to try something new. And sometimes that thing that's new is saying no. If the only thing that they feel that is demanded of them, of a social movement, is to change their language, is to issue a press release, is to put out, an ad campaign, they are all behind that. They're like, oh, we are the ally of allies. We're here for you all the way. As long as it doesn't impact their business, as long as it doesn't impact their powers, they're on side with it. But we need to think about, again, what are the roots of the inequality that's driving all of these crises to the fore, that is making up problems into crises. And I think that goes all through this, whether we're talking about economy, whether we're talking about political expression, whether we are talking about access to justice, whether we are talking about freedom from violence. All of these things centrally revolve around the axis of power. And again, that's very much true in surveillance. It's about control. It's about who has influence over society. And that is what the struggles today truly represent. We have an indentured generation that has been told they will be working for the rest of their lives just to break even on the mistakes of the last. And that generation doesn't want to be accountable for it. They refuse even responsibility for it. And the members of that generation who are on the right side of history, they aren't the ones who call the shots. They aren't the ones that have power. And I think it's important to remember that this is a constant theme throughout history. There were people who saw injustice as it was developing and called it injustice and stood up against it. And they were minimized, they were crushed, they were marginalized again and again and again, but they didn't stop. And eventually they built a critical mass. Eventually they built a movement. Eventually they coordinated. Eventually they organized. And eventually they
only on Be Positive.
The whole of society, the whole of history, that what had just moments ago been normal was now unspeakable. And it's just, I'll end on a historic note here because I've gone too long. It's important to remember that connection between the development of new and controversial powers, abilities, authorities, laws, and the close to immediate application of them against minorities. This whole idea of government, this whole idea of democracy, it only works when we all have a seat at the table. And there's this fundamental presumption, particularly in these fractious times, with this sort of new rising authoritarianism, that they believe, well, as long as you have the majority, everything's okay. But the majority can't vote away the rights of the minority, or they weren't rights. And it's important for us to remember that.